Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. Happy Saturday. I'm your host, Chris Carr.
Saturday, I am Kristen Johnson.
And we're really psyched today.
Yes,
we're especially psyched as kind of last minute, some friends of ours, Shannon and MJ, invited us to go to the Conjuring House with them tonight over in Harrisville, Rhode Island, which is actually pretty close to here. So we are grateful and thankful. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, MJ, for having us. And we'll be doing that after the show and taking some video footage. So hopefully we'll have some things to present on here. And hopefully, if all goes well, it'll end up in the documentary that we're working on that we hope to have out by the fall. So that's pretty fantastic, and we're really excited. We have an amazing guest for you, and I'm going to bring, let me see here. I need my glasses. I need glasses. Can't see a damn thing. Dr. Terje Simonsen is going to discuss his research and philosophy of the paranormal going back to ancient times. He notes that while there is nearly 150 years of scientific research in parapsychology, the field is still marginalized within academia. He also talks about the responses to the paranormal within the field of theoretical physics. His focus is on the practical applications of psi and the personal meaning of psi abilities. Now, we had Terry on a year ago, and we had a great time talking to him. And we got his book handy as promised. I said I was going to go out and buy it right away, and I did, and it's fantastic. So let's bring him right on. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you.
It's wonderful to have you back. It's been about a year. I think a year ago, we were at the height of the no bird movement.
And yes, I remember.
The movement and push for birds not being real. And that pigeons are liars. And you confirm for us that the birds in Norway, where you're from and are right now, are in fact real.
Yes, they are, and their poo are real. So you just have to ask any car owner, and you will confirm the reality of birds.
It has since been discovered that the movement was a farce, and birds are real here in the U.S. as well. It was some talk about, I think, even their poop being like GPS tracking or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
But actually, it was it's Vice put it out. There's a thing from Vice that it's actually a pretty well thought out plan for what they did. So
indeed,
anybody wants to.
But we definitely had a few laughs and giggles about that.
Yes.
And then we started to talk about your book. And of course, since that time, we bought the book, read it, love it, and want to get into some other aspects that maybe we didn't cover the last time.
Yes.
You mentioned consciousness quite a bit as playing a role in psi abilities. So maybe we could start there.
By habit, we tend to think of consciousness as just something that I have inside my head, and you have inside your head, and our listeners have inside their heads. But if we look on consciousness rather not like just an individualistic thing, but rather like a collective field of information that we share, and therefore it's something like the internet. I use the concept the mental internet in my book. Then these phenomena that seem so mysterious, like for instance telepathy and clairvoyance, being able to see other places, being able to read other person's minds, if consciousness on a deep level is somewhat like the internet, then these phenomena are not mysterious. Rather, it's something that should be expected, since after all, the field of consciousness is a shared entity. So when I'm thinking something, I'm putting it out there. And if you are sensitive, you will be able to pick that up. But just as with, say, the electronic internet, you have to have a good search engine, and so if you do have a good search engine, then you are psychic. You are able to somehow maneuver and navigate this mental field. So that is that understanding of consciousness, which is a very old thought, but also a kind of very modern thought. That is some crucial to my approach to these phenomena. Because if consciousness is just inside my head, on your head, then real telepathy is not, at least as I perceive it, not possible. But the other way around, which I think, and so many great ancient thinkers have also thought, and some modern psychologists and quantum physicists, that consciousness is a collective shared field of information, then these phenomena are really to be expected, because, as I said, we are deeply connected. So,
agreed.
Absolutely.
I fully think that you're spot on with the mental internet. I love that analogy. I think in a way humans in general are almost conditioned not to use those size senses that they already have and expound upon them, maybe simply because they don't believe that they exist. Parapsychology has done lots of experiments. I know one of the ones you mentioned in your book involves twins from 2010.
Oh, yes, that's a beautiful one. Shall I recapitulate it? So, yes, that was a wonderful experiment. It was done in Denmark by an English professor in psychology, and also he is a great parapsychologist, Professor Adrian Parker. And he's tenured in Sweden, but this experiment was done in Denmark. And there were this couple of Danish twins, Sarah and Vicky. They were in their late 20s, and they have always felt a very strong telepathic connection. So typically also one sister would go to the shop and buy, say, a piece of clothing, a green blouse or something. Then the other would also totally independent of the first sister, go and buy a similar piece of clothing. So that had happened so often, they had decided that those who could show the bill with the earliest date stamp should keep the blouse, and the other will have to go back and change it for something or
Turn
other.
it.
Yes, so they were so closely connected in many ways, but of course they were twins and also have been brought up together. So you could say, of course, if they were very sensitive to each other, being very much in tune, shared genetics, shared milieu, could that perhaps be the explanation for these, say, synchronistically very in-tuned activities of theirs? So Professor Parker wanted to find out, and he designed quite an ingenious experiment. And one of the sisters were set in an isolated room and wired with say, equipment measuring heartbeat, measuring sweat response, all these kind of bodily responses that is possible to read on meters. And then the other sister was in a totally different room, shielded. I think it also, in fact, was electromagnetically shielded, not just sound and visually shielded, but also with electromagnetism. So that was not possible with any kind of normal communication between the sisters. So this sister, then we have the setup here. The one sister is wired with all this equipment. The other sisters has agreed to get 4 mild shocks. And that, say, point in time for those shocks were randomized. It was a computer, not a human being, who was to decide when the shocks was given, because otherwise it would be possible to make appointments and cheat, or even just by subconscious in-tuning, perhaps guess when these shocks would be given. But as I said, it was randomized. The computer gave a signal, and then there would be given a shock. And what was so, say, crazy about this was that the one sister getting the shock, immediately it was possible to see spiking on the meters on the other sister. So that is a short version. We can, of course, discuss. There are some interesting philosophical details about it also, but clearly it seemed to be a hotline between them. So one sister getting the shock, the meters on the other sister spiking immediately. So that, to me, was a very strong, what is called evidence for, what has been hypothesized about this mental internet, this connection, this collective field of consciousness connecting us all on a deep level.
Yeah, I love
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, I love that example. It's great. And I think they use like cold water, they used
Yes.
electricity, different
Yes.
shocks. And the kicker in there is that the other person, the other twin, felt it just slightly before it actually happened, right?
Yes, that is the philosophical aspect of it, which complicates the things in a way. But it's also very interesting thinking about the nature of psi phenomena, because, as you said, when, for instance, one of the shocks was electricity on a finger. She had a kind of metal ring on the finger, and there would be induced a little electric shock. And what was wondrous was not only that the meters on the other sister spiked, but that they spiked, say, a couple of seconds before the shock was given. So, if we are into the psi world here, which is not, normal world, then we have not only telepathy going on, but even precognition, because the spike happened a bit before. Of course, skeptics will say, aha, there you have faulty equipment, you have some kind of dodgy things going on. But in fact, many experience with psi have that nature. It's not always to isolate a psi phenomenon, because if you somehow dissolve the matrix of time and space we usually operate within, then these phenomena tend to somehow be chaotic with relation precisely to space and time. And as I said, therefore, it should be possible to also detect these shocks slightly before they happened, because our linear time is probably not the deepest, truth about the nature of time.
I think it's a human experience. It's just part of being, in this three-dimensional world that we live in.
Yes.
The whole concept of linear time, and the math shows, and although I can't personally do the equations, that it's not really there. I know that Dr. Dean Radin of the Institute of Noetic Sciences has done similar experiments where people would be focused on a computer, like a laptop, and they're measuring their skin, and there's a response. I think the skin tightens or something. There's a physical response when you see something that is emotionally provoking, like a kind of disturbing image. And they would watch different images, and randomly have, these kind of disturbed, whether it's war or something like that, about a picture. And the same effect happened, where the people, before that image came up, just in the milliseconds before, they had the physical reaction to what they were about to see.
Yes, Dr. Radin used 3 different types of images there. It was, scary images, neutral images, and pleasant images. And just as you said, about 3 seconds before, a scary picture would be shown at a screen, and again it was randomized. It was the computer deciding when these pictures were seen, so it was not possible to make kind of deal in beforehand between the experimenter and the staff and the subject. That's you could see the responses on the person before the scary image appeared on the screen. When the neutral image appeared, of course, that was neutral, so then you was not able to see anything. When the pleasant, there was also possible to see a reaction in advance, but that was not so strong as with the scary picture. And from an evolutionary perspective, that makes quite good sense, because for instance, if you see a beautiful person of the opposite sex, somehow that it could be, of course, a mate. But what is even more important is to escape the lion that wants to kill you anyway. So scary stuff is really, say, extremely important for survival, and then you will hopefully meet this pleasant other person and can mate later when the lion is away. So it's so important from an evolutionary perspective that we have these abilities, and I think they have served us quite well. And Raiden did his experiments to some extent with soldiers, and of course, if you are out in the field, and there could be exploding grenades or whatever, if these things are working for you, then it's much more likely that you have a better chance to survive on the battlefield. And also the military, US military had program called Stargate, where they for 20 years used or tried to train spies to use clairvoyance, remote viewing as it was called there. And then they used as test subject or trainees, they used soldiers that have escaped impossible situations on the battlefield, because they hypothesized that the reason that they had survived was they have well-developed abilities of this kind we are talking about. I can mention just a little thing. What Raiden used was measures skin conductivity, and what happens if you are scared, you sweat microscopic sweat drops, and that, say, moist on your skin will make it more permeable to electricity, and that was in Raiden's equipment. That was what he measured.
Okay, that's what it was. It's been a while since I read about those studies.
Yeah.
I do recall it was like a skin response.
Yes.
And fascinating stuff.
Very fascinating.
Now that's modern parapsychology, looking at things, but the thoughts about this and consciousness go way back to people like Immanuel Kant, right?
Yes, that is interesting, because Immanuel Kant, if our listeners have studied some European philosophy, he was, say, the king of Enlightenment philosophy. And he was in Germany, and he is very famous for 3 critiques. Critique is not a critique in this, say, negative sense, being critical, but it's more an assessment. And one of the most famous one of those critiques is Kritik der reinen Vernunft, the critique of pure reason. And that is really a theory about some aspect of consciousness. And one, say, central idea from Kant is that time and space are not real in themselves. They are created more or less by our consciousness. It gives us somehow a matrix wherein we can place what we experience. For instance, take make example, a car crash. If you are to understand the whereabouts about a car crash, you have to say, where did it happen? That is space. And when did it happen? That is time. And also there is a third very important determinator here. It's causality. What was the reason or the reasons behind this? And that is how we organize our world. And Kant had thought this sphere in German is called Ding für mich, meaning the things for me. But the other sphere outside this matrix is called Ding an sich, the thing for itself, the things for themselves. So he makes a very sharp division between what the world of experience, which is conditioned by these categories, as he's called them, and the world outside these, which it's very difficult to know something about. But as he's written a very interesting letter about that, and he mentioned a very famous demonstration of clairvoyance, and then it seems to be possible to transcend this matrix of space and time. I don't know if you want me to recapitulate that famous experience of clairvoyance.
Sure.
Or
absolutely.
Okay. Yes, there was a famous Swedish scientist, Emanuel Swedenborg, and quite a number of followers in the US for his spiritualistic life view. But he was basically a natural scientist, and he had the experience in being in one town, and suddenly and there was lots of ambassadors and the Bell Society present, lots of witnesses, and suddenly he felt an urge to leave the party, went outside, and he came back very pale. And he described that there was fire going on in Stockholm, and that was many miles away from the town they were in this party. And he described to a T how that fire developed, and also described exactly where it stopped. And this was before the mobile phone and even before the telegraph. We are now back in, I think it was about 65 or like that. I don't remember the exact year for the experience, but long before any kind of distant communication of the electronical kind. So 3 days later, they got a kind of what is called emissary from this Stockholm, informing them about what had happened. And what this emissary said was just as Mr. Swedenborg had described. And as I said, it was not possible at all to communicate in a normal way on that distance in these days. And also there were lots and lots of witnesses. And Immanuel Kant, he sent one of his friends and inquiring these witnesses, and they confirmed, yes, it happened just exactly like that. So this for Kant seemed to be a kind of opening. So in our day-to-day life, we are closed into this matrix of the space and time, but in kind of altered state of consciousness, which Swedenborg seems to have very easy access to, it's possible to transcend and go from Ding für mich to more into the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, which is not limited in the same way by space and time as our normal life. And Swedenborg has made a lot of spiritualistic philosophy about that and how souls communicate and all that stuff. Kant not necessarily buy all the spiritualistic things, but he bought the experience, the reality of clairvoyance, because of course it's possible to frame these kind of experiences. Probably you can even be a materialist and believe in clairvoyance. You don't need to be a spiritualist. Or if you are spiritualistically oriented, you can be a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Kabbalist or Sufi or whatever. So Kant didn't buy necessarily Swedenborg's philosophy, spiritualistic philosophy, but he was totally convinced about the reality of his clairvoyance.
I love that because you can't cheat, if you will. This happened in a time where people you couldn't pick up a phone and say, oh, this happened, or there's really no workaround. You would have had to have had psychic abilities to know that and to the level of detail that he did, especially. Yes.
He described almost to the meter where the fire had stopped and described the name on the house. And it's crazy accuracy, really.
Being at that time, too, you said it was in the 1700s, middle 1700s. Being at that time, you would think that he would have been persecuted as being a witch or something, because that's what they felt like at that time.
Well, he would probably not be persecuted as a witch, but rather as an ignoramus or obscurantist, because now we have entered the age of enlightenment. And, witches, by definition, did not exist in the Enlightenment. So it would not being a heretic, but rather being irrational would be the charge against him.
Right. He would have been considered a nut.
Yes.
And then later we would start to move into things like the spiritualist age,
right,
in the 1800s. And, you could come under even more fodder, but people were still doing experiments. The Psychical Society in London and the American Psychical Society started, I think, in Boston in the U.S. They were doing experiments with what they called it, I think, psychic drawing then, would later be coined as remote viewing by Ingo Swann, if I'm not mistaken, in the 70s. But one of Ingo's books, he actually gives a lot of the examples of the drawings and things they did, and that's where there'd be an object out of their reach and in a laboratory setting or out of their sight and everything else, possibly in the same room with them, like high up on the ceiling, but hidden. The person would have to draw it. And it was crazy how great some of these drawings are. And they were really spot on to whatever the objects were. So it's been studied for a long time.
Oh yes, there's quite impressive work done on that. But a problem, of course, is that usually, if we're going to what skeptics say, they could have been paid to say this, or there could be kind of loyalty because the wife of the medium was, beholden to this and anything. So there is always kind of ad hoc explanations to get away from these things, as long as you're not willing to consider that your paradigm might be limited and basically wrong. People are usually not open to somehow expand their horizon to include these kind of impressive results.
That's right. And then skepticism is healthy. We need it in the paranormal, and we need it certainly in science. But some skeptics go pretty far. I think you mentioned a great Randy in your book as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think he was a cheat. He was basically a magician, and he's most famous for having promised $1 million to anyone who would be able to prove to him that some paranormal phenomena was real. But the conditions for the competition, that he had somehow to agree on the result, and there was lots of dodgy conditions in the competition there. So and there was in fact a very famous Dutch professor and also physicist, Bierman, Dr. Bierman, and he challenged Randy to participate in some of his experiments where they use brain scanners to detect telepathic transmission and so. But suddenly Randy just skipped the whole thing and didn't communicate with him. It was kind of, as I said, he was a magician, he was a showman, and that was just kind of career stunt to me. I don't consider it a serious condition, and I know serious parapsychologists, they don't believe in Randy's honesty or being willing to admit, even if he had seen a ghost right before him, he would say, it's just a 3D projection from some kind of holographic machine or whatever, So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It's very controversial in a way. Certainly.
I don't like some skeptics I like, but I don't like Randy because I feel he's not honest. And he is also, I mentioned that in my book also, because there were some experiments done in a very serious laboratory. And then he had two assistants going undercover there and pretend to be participating in the experiments, but they were really using magic tricks. And suddenly Randy went out public and said, sir, we have got this laboratory to claim they have proven paranormal phenomena. But if you read the reports from the laboratory, that's not the case at all. It's just a scam. So Randy is not my kind of skeptic. Great physicists, of course, they have a strong skeptical component because you should not believe in anything that is not true. Of course, you shouldn't. But Randy, he was not a skeptic. He was a denier or a pseudo-skeptic, in my understanding, at least.
Yeah, no, we agree with you. And when we talk about the paranormal or parapsychology laboratory studies, they go through great lengths to, maintain scientific controls.
Measurements and
measurements. And we know a person, Gail Heisen, who's the host of Small Medium at Large, is another podcast out there we like, and we're friends with her, was one of the people that would be participating with Dean in some of the experiments that he did. And there's a crazy amount of scientific controls in those experiments. They're not just something you can fake or really, skew the results of.
No, as they say, and even the most famous skeptic, or the two great skeptics in Britain, and one of them is psychology professor Chris French, and he also was editor for the Skeptic magazine. And he says, and as I said, he's an arch skeptic himself, and he says some of the experiments of parapsychology are even better controlled than, say, normal psychological experiments. So he is quite impressed by the rigorosity of the parapsychologist's way of dealing with these phenomena. But what should be understood, as I said when we discussed the experiment, Ellen Parker, the twin telepathy, psi might be of a nature that not necessarily, say, resembles our expectation, because, as I said, if you twist with time, what comes before could come after what comes after, and all that kind of things, it's difficult to use a normal protocol. So that is a challenge. And also, if there is possible, for instance, to have telepathic exchange, not just between the two persons doing, say, an experiment, say one tries to project a figure into the mind of another, but then you have lots of laboratory assistants, for instance, also. And if they are, say, really into the experiment, they also will strongly project images that might be perceived by the persons taking part in the experiments. So isolating things so that you have, say, a rigorous protocol for psi experiments is rather difficult. But as I said, also Chris French is kind of impressed the way the parapsychologists deal with this, and he says that they are at par with or even better than normal psychology very often.
Yeah, we've heard that, actually. And the use of things like Faraday cages around the subjects to prevent, radio transmissions, like people in the paranormal would use like a, spirit box. You might put that in a little Faraday bag to prevent, radio from coming through it, and just let the
May I also a very interesting experiment for healing or intention at distance. I don't know if you remember that from a book, the Hawaii experiment. May I recapitulate that as well? Yes. They did at a hospital in Hawaii. They did experiment. They had 11 healers with 11 patients, and each healer could choose his or her patient. And then the patient was put in a brain scanner, so you could read all what happens in the different brain waves of this patient. And also this room, as I said, it was done in a hospital in Hawaii, and the room was not only say visually shielded or auditively shielded, but also electromagnetically shielded. So it would not be possible to have a little radio or like kind of device communicating between the healer and the patient. So the protocol for the experiment was that the healer was to send good vibes, good healing intentions to the patients for a period of some seconds, and then pause. And then send more healing good intentions, and then pause, and then send more, So you had sequence with sending healing and pausing, sending healing and pausing. And the conductor of the experiments was Dr. Jan Achtenberg. She is professor. She has passed away, regrettably, but she was professor in psychology. And she said that in 9 out of 11 cases, it was possible to see very clearly on the screen when the healing was sent and when the healing was paused. And she described it a very, I like to say, metaphor she used. She said the patient's brains were lighted like Christmas trees, You could see, yes. So, and that was 9 out of 11 cases. And they were evaluated statistically afterwards. And I think they said for this to happen by coincidence, it would be just a chance of 1 out of 5,000 or even less. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would think it'd be even greater than that. That's amazing. Statistically, it would be, how do you replicate that kind of thing?
Yes, and we have Dr. Achtenberg, and we had Dr. Radin, and we had Dr. and Professor Adrian Parker. There's people with impeccable academic credentials doing these experiments. And also, I would like to mention, if I'm talking a bit too much now, so just stop me. But people, I discuss sometimes with skeptics, and they say, but there are no kind of serious stuff in serious psychological journals about this, and so why is that if these things are real and so. And I said, but you are not updated because the most prestigious psychological journal in the world is normally thought to be American Psychologist. That is released and even is the flagship journal of the APA, the American Psychological Association. And in the May issue of 2018, there was an article by Professor Etzel Cardenia. It's called The Experimental Evidence for Parapsychological Phenomena. And as I said, this article is in the most prestigious psychological journal in the world. And he concludes, just to sum it up, he concludes that yes, several of these phenomena are real and supported by experimental evidence. But no, we have not yet reached an explanatory model that everybody can agree on. So there you have it.
Yeah. Well, you look at things like quantum physics,
yes,
which are tossed around a lot, especially in the paranormal field, without any real explanation of what they're talking about.
Right.
And string theory, and when you talk about multi-dimensions and different timelines and that kind of thing, I feel like science is slowly catching up. You mentioned quantum physics and bilocation and, in your book, as well as quantum entanglement. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that in simplistic terms so that people can understand that, are interested in this, because I hear this as an excuse, it's just got to be quantum physics. You know what I mean? Like a blanket statement without
yes, of course. To me, the phenomena is what is the most important, the phenomena in themselves. But as they say, a different set of data can be explained within different models. So I will not say that I know which model of consciousness is the right one. And also, there are also different, I think it's 8 basic interpretation of quantum physics. So which one is, say, most relevant for psi research? I will not say I have some personal favorite, but I cannot say that this model is the right interpretation of quantum physics and this one is wrong or so on. But one experiment that is very famous that seems to indicate, seems to suggest that, for instance, a phenomenon like telepathy might have a, say, good scientific explanation is, for instance, what is usually referred to as the aspect experiment. It's named after a French physicist called Alain Aspect. And to make it just simple, it is if you have a kind of what is called a nuclear accelerator, like they have in CERN in Switzerland, for instance, you can collide elementary particles. And in this aspect experiment, they collided 2 electrons. Boom, like that. And when these electrons collide, there will be created particles of light, photons. And since they are born, there will be created 2 photons in this collision here. And since they are born at the same time, it's usually called twin photons. And what happens is when these electrons collide, it creates these photons, and they are hurtling away to opposite sides, like that, whoosh, like for kilometers and kilometers. And what is really wondrous is and this has been measured at least 3 laboratories, different places in the world. If one of those twin photons, say, is measured going downwards, the twin will be going upwards. If one is measured going rightwards, the other would go left. And if it's the first one is going up, the other one will go down. So they mirror each other completely. And that is, even if they are kilometers away from each other, they still work as a unit, being in some way connected, even by normal understanding of space, they are totally, say, split apart. And as I said, the movements mirror each other. So they are a kind of, say, unit. We perceive them perhaps as two different photons. But as I said, basically, it is a unit. And thereby, these phenomena could be explained perhaps by superstrings and that kind of things. But if we think along these lines and say, okay, that might not just be photons working in that way. Maybe our consciousness is working in the same way. So when something happens, if I meet a person, we have a strong exchange emotionally, and we split apart, and perhaps we still are connected on some level. So if that person, for instance, experience strong feeling of joy or strong feeling of terror, I will be able to that because we have become entangled in that meeting, just like the photons. At least it's a very thrilling metaphor, and I think it might be very indicative of how things are working.
Absolutely. I love that. And thank you for that explanation. And people have to remember, and you said this at the front of the show, about consciousness. People have a tendency to think about it in their head, in their brain, yes, physically in their mind. But there's so much more on a cellular level. You have examples of people that get heart transplants, and the emotions of the person they got, that yes, the heart came from, seem to carry on in the new person that has the heart and that sort of thing. So the memory isn't necessarily, everything is not necessarily stored in the mind. We have to think outside of that box, and it might be bigger than that. You mentioned Rupert Sheldrake in your book.
Yes,
and we love Rupert. He talks about morphic resonance and
yes. Rupert is famous for, say, relaunching in a modern version kind of a theory of evolution that is traditionally called Lamarckism, after another French theorist that had some kind of theory. He was French in the 18th century, and he said that hereditary capabilities can be transmitted to later generations, but he had no good explanation for how that could happen. Of course, you can see there is this ostrich, African ostrich. It has kind of thick skin on its belly, a little pillow that is helpful when it lays on the sand. But how that has developed, because it's not a matter of survival, it seems more a matter of pleasure, or what you can say. So there are so many, say, rational things in nature that seems they are placed there with some kind of intention. But how nature has been able to do that Lamarck could not explain. But Sheldrake has launched his theory of morphic fields, and he says that, for instance, if you have crocodiles, and the crocodiles do have experiences of hunger, of mating, of swimming, or whatever, and then all this information that the crocodiles and the baboons and the elephants and the tigers and every kind of animal, but these kind of information field related to one species will expand over the years, and it will contain more and more and more and more and more information about that species. And when that, say, memory bank is full, the account is full of valuable memories, then it may, on some for different reasons, there may be triggered a beneficial mutation. Very many of the mutations in nature are not beneficial. You can get these kind of deers with two large horns, and so it's not necessarily beneficial. But this account of say, experience, which Sheldrake calls morphic fields, they have somehow increased the possibility for a mutation to become beneficial. So it will not be development, but it will be evolution, develop further. So and say the world is somehow going towards higher and higher consciousness, higher and higher of a level of sophistication of consciousness. So that is what we see. Okay, you can be a Christian, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a pantheist, you can be an atheist, but still, I think most people with somewhat scientific mind will agree that life has started as on Earth. At least started as small microbes in the say primordial sea, and then we are suddenly here some million years after. It's an extreme evolution that has happened for coming from amoeba in this primordial sea to complex human beings, space traveling beings even. So to explain how is that, because a microorganism, why should it start developing at all? It's quite happy where it is. It feeds on whatever is available and has no really impetus to develop. But if it is like Sheldrake suggests, then when millions and millions and microbes have had experiences, they will generate this field of consciousness. The memory bank will expand, and after some million years, it will be enough information there to kick off a kind of beneficial, say, leap in evolution. So I think his explanatory model makes very lots of sense, and I met his thoughts when I was a student. He has 2 books, and the second book it's called The Presence of the Past, and I think the title says it all, that the past is not past, it's present in the form of the information in these morphic fields.
And it's just out there. He talks a lot about household pets and their telepathic connection to their owners.
Yes.
And I know he's gone through great lengths to study this in the most, in ways that kind of defeat the, well, the dog just, here's the car kind of thing. And he's talking about dogs, cats, even parrots was a very good example. And he would randomize the times the owners came home, how they came home, sent people home in cabs. And statistically, the animals know. They always know, especially the parrot, knows when apparently it was kind of an interesting story about the parrot. When the owner is coming home, like there was a telepathic connection, and it couldn't be explained away as simply as they have better hearing and they just know, or they're used to a certain time of day.
Just to mention the morphic fields again, this information, this is a collective, not individualistic process. But as you say, this seems to be telepathy is somehow using the same route as the morphic fields generating information. So it is kind of what the nature does on kind of unconscious level, just as seems to be a function in nature itself. We as humans, or even our pets, are able to do with a more, say, individual intention. One, I mentioned that experiment with this telepathic terrier, JT. Should I mention that?
Sure.
Yes. Yes, that is one of the most famous experiments Sheldrake made. There was a woman, Pat Smart, and she had a terrier called JT, and when she came home from town, it would always, or nearly always, be in the window, on the window, waiting for her. And just as you said, Sheldrake was connected to this case and wanted to check it out, and went to great lengths. So he installed cameras, so it was possible to see the dog's movement even if there were no person present in the room. And what they saw was when Pam went into, for instance, the bus down in town, or into the taxi, or into the car, say, taking the action to getting home, then the dog would start to move towards the window. And a statistically very strong support for this. And when she did not go enter the vehicle, the dog would just, stroll along and do whatever dogs does when they are home alone. So it was so, and yes, and he has filmed these cases, and he has even filmed not one case but 100 cases with this dog. So very strong evidence for this terrier to be telepathic.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm familiar with that. And like I mentioned, the parrot was interesting because the parrot was only 2 generations out of being wild. Where dogs and cats, they're kind of domesticated. The parrot's only 2 generations out from being a wild bird. Mm-hmm. So, very fascinating that it just has that natural ability to seemingly know the intentions of its owner.
Mm. No, I've heard so many stories in our local little town here, because I discussed these theories with, say, people being interested. And yes, always when I come home from work, my mom and daddy told me that my dog immediately runs to the front door. And when if I for some reason is delayed, the dog will also be delayed going to the door. So it's not just coming home at the same time or like anything like that. Seems to be a direct hotline between the pet and the owner.
Absolutely, and it gets down to those intentions.
Yes.
Frank Glenn from the Wizard's Table, had an interesting comment here. He says, I remember once I got into an altered state of consciousness and met with a very powerful entity, and this entity told me something very simple and very true. Quote, all things are connected all the time.
Yes.
And Ken is a sorcerer, so he's dealing with things like intentions and magic and change in a world really through one's intentions or connecting with other entities to help those connections come to fruition, those intentions. Right.
Yes.
So I think that's an interesting comment because all this stuff seems very tied together.
It is. And as I said, we discussed some possible interpretation of quantum physics. And one I am quite fond of is the holographic principle that was launched by David Bohm, a great American physicist that went to England. Because he was had some socialist sympathies, and it was McCarthy time, in the US, and it was not possible to have any kind of, say, even if Santa Claus had red costume was suspect, So, but David Bohm went to England, and he had this holographic principle that the world is basically created as a great hologram, where every little piece of the hologram has information about all the rest of the hologram. As they say, the droplet mirrors the universe. And I think that's also it's called the net of Indra in Hindu tradition. It's like a golden net with cut crystals in the nodes of the net, and all the what is called facets of the crystals are reflecting the whole net and all the other crystals. So it's a mirror in mirror in mirror in mirror in mirror in mirror, all around. So I think it's difficult to express scientifically this, but the hologram is kind of say close to how Bohm's understanding how the world works. And in fact, the first version of my book was released by a little English publisher in Italy called Pari Publishing, and that was created by a quantum physicist, David Peat, who had been working together with David Bohm for many years. So the holographic principle seems to if you have that kind of interpretation of quantum physics, it seems to say make a good case for that everything is connected and everything is it's not just one connection from A to B. It's it's a network of connection. I made if you have my book here, could you show the book? Yes, you see the golden network that symbolizes this connection. Yes, the golden network. And it's a very complex, everything being connected to everything else.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's also something Sheldrake talks about and others about the patterns within patterns. So it's almost like a perspective, From one perspective, we can see patterns in our nature and our universe. But when we look under a microscope, we see the same kind of patterns, but we see things we couldn't possibly, see otherwise through our normal senses. And if we go back and you pull back and look at the universe, you start to look at solar systems and then galaxies and the universe itself. These same patterns keep turning up, but of course we can't see them. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. So there has to be some sort of connection.
Yes, probably very famous scientific book about this. It's called, it's by French Jewish theorist Benoit Mandelbrot, this fractal geometry of nature. That is what would you say, for instance, the spiral. You find the spiral in the stellar nebulous, there's the spirals, and you find the spiral in your DNA, the helix. So the spiral is a fractal, it's self-repetitive on different scales, and you find also lots of other kind of fractals, structures that are self-similar in different sizes and so to me at least this seems to go very well together with the holographic principles, where a structure is repeated and repeated and repeated all through the hologram. It's extremely complex doing the mathematics for this. I tried to read some of the stuff and I understand some of it, but not all, I have to admit so. But
the beauty of it is you don't have to be able to do all the equations to know what the end result is and what it kind of means and points to. String theories like that as well, right? And these multi-dimensional things, I couldn't possibly I wouldn't know where to start with some of the math that is behind them, but I can understand when they say, okay, there's 11 dimensions and here's what happens. Starts to become irrelevant after 5, and it's fascinating. And
very fascinating. And also, as for instance, that time itself might be a fractal. As I said, we tend to think of time as linear, and we go from A to B to C to D, and that's 12 o'clock. It's 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., 3 p.m. But maybe time does not basically have that structure at all. Maybe time is in a loop and a loop and a loop and a loop. So, so 1 o'clock might be closer to 6 o'clock than to 3 o'clock. It might be because we don't see the structure of time really. And if you go into, for instance, string theory and M theory, then you have the possibility to watch time also in some of the same, that there are dimension within dimensions. So our oversimplified understanding, a day-to-day understanding of time, it's probably not, telling the truth about the nature of things.
Yeah.
We agree.
People need to understand this stuff. You don't need to understand every equation to kind of get something from it. One of the comments out here, Natalie Mosley says, I used to come home randomly from university to surprise my mom, but she always knew I was coming because the horse would stand by the gate looking up the road about 40 minutes before I got there.
Oh, wow.
And that plays right into Sheldrake studies. Absolutely.
The first one who introduced me to the kind of esoteric law was a young woman I was dating when I was 21, and she had bought an old book, Norwegian book by a quite gifted psychic lady, The Power of Mind. It was called, quite a common title, and so she had read that book, and she had a good friend that she was very closely connected to, and what she had. I will see if I can explain this very easily. She had sent telepathically and an invitation to this friend, and she had told her, "I will now do the dishes, and then I will make some tea, and please come over to me." So she sent that invitation telepathically, and then she started to do the dishes, and she started to make tea, but no one came. And then she said, she repeated the invitation, "I have made tea, please come immediately now." But no one came. And then she said, "Okay, since you will not come over to me, I will come to you instead." So she went over to this friend that greeted her in the door with 2 cups of tea. So she had sabotaged the invitation, and just to prove her point that she was really in tune, she had made ready tea for both of them when my friend come over. That kind of demonstrations. If you are very intuitive, these things are possible.
Yeah, we agree.
Oh,
We're constantly in each other's heads, and we talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
I will just be thinking of the same random thing.
Silly thing.
Oh, yes.
Silly things like all the time. And, we'll make want to say something like, oh, we got to go do this in 3 months. And she'll be like, oh, I was just thinking that. Or the reverse,
Get out of my head.
Get out of my head. Because it happens a lot.
And again, if we think of consciousness as a shared mental internet, you are very good connected on Facebook and Instagram and all the, say, spiritual social media. You have when he posts something, you will perceive it immediately, and with she posting, you will perceive it on your page immediately. That's just a metaphor, but we have all this experience of being connected daily via the internet. Therefore, I use that metaphor.
That's right. And our phones and stuff. And we know,
yes,
you get a text and you know who it is before you look at it, or a phone call, the phone rings and you're like, oh,
rings,
yep.
I must tell you, it was good. A friend of mine, another friend of mine, she's living in Thailand, and she's a very intuitive person, and she has a extremely good connection with animals. That's a deep intuitive thing. But she was having exam 2 days ago, and she had somehow missed what the exam was about. She had thought it was neurophysiology, but in fact it was pharmacology. So when she entered the room with the exams and the papers and all thing, heck, I have read for the wrong subject. And there was what would be the adverse effects of serotonin, what would be the adverse effects of melatonin, and what the GABA connections and blah, blah, blah. Quite demanding stuff. But she somehow relaxed and tuned in and started, just going with the flow, trying to download the answers from the mental internet. And she ended up answering correct 18 out of 20 questions.
Oh, wow.
Good
for her.
She was close to the top in her class, and she had not read the subject.
Oh, that's amazing.
Wow, it's great.
It is.
Yeah.
And that was just 2 days ago. And she was stunned herself because she didn't know how she did it. But as I said, she is a very natural intuitive. And that similar experience I have interviewed in connection with my book. I've interviewed close to 100 professional psychics from different traditions, from Sami tradition, Native American tradition, Jamaican tradition, Canadian tradition also. And 2 of those psychics have also told about that, sitting on the exam and suddenly just knowing the answers and not being able to know where they're coming from. One of those got problems with the teacher because the teacher said, you have to demonstrate. You cannot just give the answer. You have to demonstrate. How did you find that answer? And that she could know. But so the information is all there. And if you're sensitive, you can download it.
It's right there. And it's kind of similar
Absolutely.
to something like people talk about the Akashic records, being this record of everything that happened, is happening, and will happen. Being just an accessible thing, almost like a library or a book, a person can mentally go to. I love that imagery. And one of the things I really love about your book, we've talked about some heady topics like quantum physics and things of that nature, but you break it down very much in layman's terms. So this is not a hard book to read, folks. If you're not well read on those subjects, Terje just breaks this down in a way that it's a page burner. It really is. Like, you'll go through this, you'll learn a lot. One of the topics that I really liked, and maybe we can wrap up with, was psychic archaeology.
Yes, that's intriguing subject, and one of the most famous within there is Canadian professor Norman Emerson, and he was the chairman of the Canadian Archaeological Society. He passed away some decades ago, but he has excavated dozens and dozens of what is called villages from the First Nations people in Canada, and he was in a party was introduced to an impressive psychic called George McMullen. And George McMullen, he passed away a few years ago. He became quite old. And what was wondrous about McMullen, that he was able to, if someone gave him kind of, say, an artifact, it could be an old vase or a ring or a coin or whatever, he would be able to just feel and then suddenly download information connected. Who had made this? Where was it from? How old was it? How did it end up in Canada? And all that kind of things. That is an ability. We can call it clairvoyance, of course, but a kind of special case of clairvoyance. It's called psychometrics. So you are somehow doing the metrics of that thing with your psychic abilities. That's so amazing. and first it was just kind of party game, because people, that was kind of a pipe, and that was kind of this, and this was an arrowhead, was used for hunting that kind of deer, but not that kind of deer, and so. But then Emerson thought, okay, maybe that is this guy might be not just funny in parties, but perhaps he could assist my excavation as well. So he brought George McMullen to different say digging fields where they had some projects going on, and he was able to locate much say not yet unearthed stuff. He could say, over there is had been a palisade, and there they had a little fortress, and it was about 50 yards. And so, and when they started digging, they usually always, I think it was about 80% of the cases, the information proved correct. So that is very, and how did he do that? He didn't know that, but he had some times it just came to him like visions, and he also had kind of what we could name spiritual contacts. It was kind of 3 different voices or something, beings, entities that he was communicating with also, who would tell him different things about these excavations and so. So that is a very, and as I said, this was not just a kind of old hippie on LSD. This was a Professor Norman Emerson. And he was the chairman of the Canadian Archaeological Society, and he has in fact written some essays about it. So that is a very, say, important person within the field of psychic archaeology. And then, of course, we have Stefan Schwartz, who is a great researcher in the paranormal, and he has done in Alexandria, in a famous, there was a famous harbor. Alexandria is in Egypt. He conducted several archaeological excavation on the bottom of the sea with the help of psychics. I think he had 11 psychics, and among others this George McMullen. And he also had a woman that had participating in the Stargate program, the American military program, called Hella Hamid. She was a photographer. So George McMullen and Hella Hamid, I think they were the 2 most central, but there were, if I don't remember wrong, 9 others as well. And they did find lots of historical things, and they documented these finds with the camera. And about 10 years later, it was an international expedition confirming, and going, literally speaking, diving deeper into the matter. And today it's possible for scuba divers to follow a route and to watch some of the artifacts they found on the bottom of the sea. So that is also a famous case. And I mentioned also Glastonbury, which is a very famous old monastery in England, that was also excavated after, there was a kind of trance medium receiving messages from the Watchers, which was a group of spirits that somehow felt obliged to watch over this place and provide information to the archaeologist digging there. And also quite recently there was this find of the skeleton of Richard III, which is quite famous from Shakespeare play, my horse, my kingdom from a horse. That was Richard's III saying before he fell off his horse and was killed. But he had been disappeared for 400 years, or even for, was it 500 years? I don't remember exact year now. But then it was amateur archaeologist and script writer, Scottish, who Philippa Langley is her name, and she felt a strong haunch. She was in a parking lot and she felt a strong haunch. Here is Richard buried. And because she was a resourceful person, she was able to get kind of license and get started in excavation. And 1 meter under the exact spot she had marked for, they found a skeleton. And it was tested genetically with the DNA up against living relatives from the sister, Anne of York, the sister of Richard III. And it was a 99.999 hit. So, yeah.
I read that story. It was really cool.
Yes, and they even arranged for a reburial of Richard in the Cathedral of Leicester. So that means they are sure this was really Richard. So these are some examples of psychic archaeology.
It's amazing.
Excellent. I see. Robin, thank you for posting the Canadian Amazon link for the book. The book, of course, is called A Short History of Nearly, and I've put nearly in parentheses, Everything Paranormal. The subtitle there is Our Secret Powers, Telepathy, Clairvoyance, and Precognition. It is available on Amazon. There's another link here. I'm going to put that up. And thank you guys for putting those links up. We appreciate it. But basically, you can find it very easily. And we can personally attest, like, this is a really good book. And again, it's not a book that's overly complicated, like, oh my God, I'm never going to get it. You're going to learn things. There are subjects in here that I'm pretty well read on, and I learned stuff. There were stories in there I didn't know, and I was like, wow. And of course, there's other aspects like the psychic archaeology that I thought was so fascinating. I had no idea that people were using psychic abilities to find relics and lost things. You wouldn't even think about that, but there it is.
There's Gail.
It happens. Oh yeah,
speaking of you, girl.
There's Gail. We mentioned you tonight, Gail. Small, medium, and large.
We love you
love
too.
You. Gail was the subject of Dean Radin's.
Yeah, you remember you mentioned her.
Yes.
Also, the book contains some stuff from Norway. We have a tradition with psychics and healers in Norway. I mentioned a quite famous guy that he has received more than 40,000 patients, and he has also helped the Red Cross and the police finding missing persons on several occasions. He's very well documented, and I've spoken to him several times, and he's so impressive. He passed away last year. I'm sorry to say that, but I bring some quite fascinating anecdotes about his amazing abilities.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I do recommend everybody go out there. It seems to be a little confusion about the links, but if you just go on Amazon and search for this, Terje Simonsen, your first name is spelled Terje. Some people will hear this as a podcast, just so you know, and it won't have the visual. And Simonsen is spelled Simonsen. Go and look for his book.
Just
buy it. You'll love it.
Quick comment after that, please.
And Gail says having dinner with Dean on Tuesday. There you go. So,
great.
Russell Targ she speaks to every day.
I'm envious of her.
Yeah, we are too. He doesn't call us.
Dean is really a great guy. He's helped me getting a little scholarship, and so he is a great researcher and a great person. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful you did that.
Excellent. I guess the Psi Squad in California, they worked over 30 years of police working on missing persons. Bev Yeager. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you again.
Yes, Ken.
Okay, thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. And go out, buy the book. Let us know what you think. And follow Terje on Facebook is another place to find you. Any other places you want people to go?
The book has a little page on Facebook, as you said, so you can check out there are some interviews and also some podcasts on Spotify if they find my name, and there should be 20 podcasts or something like that. I think so. If they're interested.
Podcast that you hosted or shows you were on like art?
More like say it's quite similar to your shows, and also a different kind of some more collective events as well.
Oh, great. Yep. This will be out there on Spotify and anywhere you get podcasts.
Yes.
So look for that if you are looking to catch up. And also, whatever platform you're watching us now or listening to us, go into the archives, because we talked to Terje about a year ago.
Yes, we did.
And we tried to cover some different things. So you get a real good feel for the book and what Terje's about and your own personal stories. I think we're more on that first interview. So thank you again for joining us. We know it's
Thanks
late.
a lot for having me.
We're in Norway.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Have a great night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
I'm going to pull you out of the stream. We'll be right with you. And we got to wrap things up because we're on our way to Harrisville, going to the Conjuring House. Thank you, Shannon and MJ. We very much appreciate it. Thank you, everyone in the audience tonight, for your comments. And if we didn't get to them all, we apologize, but we do appreciate it. And thank you for watching and listening. Have a great weekend, guys. We'll see you next Thursday.
Bye.